Have you ever felt trapped in a darkness so deep it seemed there was no way out? This is the story of a woman who lived in the shadows of despair until one encounter with Jesus changed everything. In the small village of Magdala, nestled along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, Mary's life was a tapestry of pain and isolation. Once a woman of dignity and hope, she had become a prisoner to 7 demons that tormented her mind, body, and soul. The townspeople whispered about her, their eyes filled with pity and fear. "Stay away from her," they warned. "She's not in her right mind." Mary's world was a blur of confusion, fear, and loneliness. The shadows of her past clung to her like a second skin, and she had long given up on the idea of freedom. But one day, everything changed. Word had spread through the region about a man named Jesus, a teacher, a healer, a miracle worker. Some called him a prophet. Others whispered that he might be the long-awaited Messiah. Crowds flocked to him wherever he went, desperate for a touch, a word, a glimpse of hope. Mary, too, had heard the stories. At first, she dismissed them as mere rumors. What could this man do for her? She was beyond help, beyond hope. Or so she thought. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, Mary found herself drawn to the outskirts of the village where Jesus was teaching. She kept her distance, hiding in the shadows, afraid of the judgmental stares and harsh words that always followed her. But something about his voice, calm, kind, and full of authority, pulled her closer. She watched as he healed the sick, comforted the brokenhearted, and spoke of a kingdom where the last would be first and the lost would be found. Then, as if he could sense her presence, Jesus turned and looked directly at her. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Mary felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. It was as if he could see past the demons, past the pain, and into the very core of her being. Without a word, he walked toward her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Mary's heart raced. Should she run? Should she hide? But something kept her rooted to the spot. When he reached her, Jesus spoke just 2 words: "Be free." His voice was gentle but filled with power. Suddenly, Mary felt a surge of energy rush through her body, as if a heavy chain had been broken. The voices that had tormented her for so long fell silent. The darkness that had clouded her mind lifted, and for the first time in years, she could think clearly. She looked at Jesus, tears streaming down her face, and fell to her knees. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Jesus placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." The crowd watched in awe, murmuring among themselves. Who was this man who could command demons with a word? Who was this woman who had been transformed before their eyes? Mary stood, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same. From that day forward, she followed Jesus, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude and love. She became one of his most devoted followers, supporting his ministry and standing by his side even when others turned away. But the shadows of her past still lingered in the corners of her mind. Would people ever see her as anything more than the woman who had been possessed? Could she truly start over? Or would her past always define her? These questions haunted her as she walked the dusty roads beside Jesus, learning from his teachings and witnessing his miracles. Little did she know, her journey was just beginning, and the dawn of a new life was closer than she ever imagined. After her life-changing encounter with Jesus, Mary Magdalene became a devoted follower, traveling with him and his disciples as he preached the good news of the kingdom of God. She witnessed miracles that defied explanation: the blind receiving sight, the lame walking, and even the dead being raised to life. Each miracle deepened her faith and solidified her belief that Jesus was no ordinary man. He was the Son of God. But despite the joy she found in her new life, Mary couldn't shake the whispers that followed her. Though Jesus had freed her from the demons, the stigma of her past lingered like a shadow. Some in the crowd still pointed and murmured, "Isn't that the woman who was possessed? What is she doing here?" Their words stung, but Mary clung to the truth Jesus had spoken over her. She was loved, she was forgiven, and she was free. One day, as Jesus and his disciples passed through a village, a Pharisee named Simon invited them to dinner. Simon was a man of influence, and his invitation was a rare honor. But as they reclined at the table, Mary entered the room, her heart pounding. She had heard Jesus was there and felt compelled to see him. In her hands, she carried an alabaster jar of expensive perfume, a treasure she had saved for this moment. The room fell silent as Mary approached Jesus. Without a word, she knelt at his feet, her tears falling freely. She wiped them away with her hair, an act of humility and devotion that shocked the onlookers. Then she broke open the jar and poured the perfume on his feet, anointing them with the fragrant oil. The scent filled the room, a symbol of her gratitude and love. Simon the Pharisee watched with disdain. If this man were a prophet, he thought, he would know what kind of woman is touching him, that she is a sinner. But Jesus, knowing Simon's thoughts, turned to him and said, "Simon, I have something to tell you." Simon nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Tell me, teacher." Jesus began. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave both debts. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." Simon nodded, his curiosity piqued. "Tell me, teacher." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned to Mary and continued, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house, and you did not give me water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but she has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven, little loves little." Simon's face flushed with embarrassment, but Mary's heart swelled with joy. Jesus had not only defended her, but had also publicly declared her forgiven. In that moment, the shadows of her past lost their power. She was no longer defined by her sins or her struggles. She was defined by his love. As the days turned into weeks, Mary's faith grew stronger. She walked with Jesus through the highs and lows of his ministry, learning from his teachings and witnessing his compassion for the broken and the lost. But the greatest test of her faith was yet to come. One fateful night, as Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, Mary stood nearby with the other women who followed him. She watched in horror as a mob arrived, led by Judas Iscariot, one of Jesus' own disciples. They arrested Jesus, binding him and leading him away like a common criminal. Mary's heart shattered as she realized the man who had saved her was now facing unimaginable suffering. The disciples fled in fear, but Mary stayed. Along with a few other women, she followed at a distance, her tears mingling with the dust of the road. She watched as Jesus was tried, mocked, and beaten. She stood at the foot of the cross as he was crucified, her heart breaking with every labored breath he took. And when he breathed his last, she felt as if the light had gone out of the world. But even in her grief, Mary held on to a glimmer of hope. She remembered his words, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life." Could it be true? Could he really rise again? The hours after Jesus' crucifixion were a blur of grief and despair for Mary Magdalene. She had watched as his body was taken down from the cross and laid in a tomb. A heavy stone rolled across the entrance to seal it. The man who had freed her from darkness, who had shown her unconditional love, was gone. The world felt emptier without him, and Mary's heart ached with a pain she had never known. But even in her sorrow, Mary couldn't stay away. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, she made her way to the tomb with spices to anoint Jesus' body. It was a final act of love, a way to honor the one who had given her so much. As she approached the tomb, her heart sank. The stone had been rolled away and the tomb was empty. Panic and confusion gripped her. Had someone taken his body? She ran to tell Peter and John, her voice trembling with fear. "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." The two disciples rushed to the tomb, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the morning. They peered inside and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but Jesus was gone. Bewildered, they returned home, leaving Mary alone at the tomb. Tears streamed down Mary's face as she stood outside the tomb, her heart heavy with grief. She bent down to look inside once more, and there she saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been. "Woman, why are you crying?" they asked. "They have taken my Lord away," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." As she turned to leave, she saw a man standing nearby. Thinking he was the gardener, she pleaded, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Then the man spoke her name, Mary. In that moment, everything changed. She recognized his voice. It was Jesus. Her heart leapt with joy as she cried out, "Rabboni," which means teacher. She fell to her knees, reaching out to him, but Jesus gently said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Then the man spoke her name, Mary. Mary's tears of sorrow turned to tears of joy. Jesus was alive. The shadows of death had been overcome by the light of resurrection. She ran back to the disciples, her heart bursting with the good news. "I have seen the Lord," she exclaimed, her voice filled with awe and wonder. She told them everything he had said, her words a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. Then the man spoke her name, Mary. From that day forward, Mary Magdalene became a herald of the resurrection, sharing the good news with everyone she met. She, who had once been bound by darkness, was now a bearer of light, a living testament to the power of Jesus' love and redemption. Her story was no longer defined by her past, but by the hope she carried in her heart. Then the man spoke her name, Mary. Want more stories like this? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Then the man spoke her name, Mary.